I tried to be a hero for my colleague. I may have just ended her career and started a small chemical fire. It all started at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. My phone buzzed with a text from Jasmine and my heart sank. You know that kind of text, the I'm so sorry but kind. She'd left a hot plate on in the lab. Of course she had. Jasmine is a certified genius, the kind of person who operates on a different intellectual plane, but she has the practical awareness of a goldfish. Tomorrow was her big day, a presentation to a panel of investors, the kind of people who could either fund our obscure little biochem project for the next 5 years or laugh us out of the building. Her entire career, and let's be honest, a good chunk of mine was riding on this. So like an idiot, I said yes. I dragged myself out of bed, found my keys, and drove the 20 minutes back to the sterile, silent building. The lab at night is creepy. The constant, low hum of the ventilation and the freezers is the only sound, and every shadow looks like a contamination incident waiting to happen. I found the offending hot plate, its little red light glowing accusingly in the dark. A simple flick of a switch and the crisis was averted, heroic duty done. As I was about to leave, I did a quick scan of her prep station for the demo. Everything was laid out in neat rows of beakers and flasks. That's when I saw it. A small bottle clearly labeled saline solution. It was a cornerstone of her demo's initial safe stage, but the label was crooked, peeling at one corner like it had been slapped on in a hurry. It just felt wrong. Jasmine was a mess, but her lab work was always surgically precise. This was not her. I don't know why I did it. Call it a gut feeling, a sixth sense honed by years of seeing stupid, preventable accidents happen in labs. I told myself I was just checking. I picked up the saline solution bottle, the glass cool and smooth against my clammy palm, and unscrewed the cap. A sharp, acrid smell like vinegar mixed with nail polish remover hit my nostrils. It was volatile, aggressive. It was absolutely not salt water. My stomach twisted into a cold, hard knot. My eyes darted to the next bottle. Distilled H2O, I gave it a gentle swirl. The liquid inside didn't splash, it rolled. It was thick, viscous, clinging to the glass like corn syrup and catching the overhead fluorescent lights with a sickly, oily sheen. My blood ran cold. I moved down the line, a growing, suffocating sense of dread building in my chest. Copper sulfate, which should have been a brilliant, vibrant blue, was a completely clear liquid. Sodium hydroxide, a basic solution, had a pH test strip I nervously dipped in it turned a furious, angry red. An acid. It was an acid labeled as a base. Oh God. It wasn't one or two mistakes. It was all of them. Every single bottle in the demonstration lineup was a lie. The labels were a complete work of fiction, a chemical booby trap laid out for its own creator. My first thought was sabotage, some rival researcher maybe, but that felt too dramatic, too much like a movie. The second, more terrifying thought was that Jasmine herself had done this. Maybe in a state of pre-presentation panic, a sleep-deprived fugue where she was on autopilot, she'd somehow managed to mislabel her entire setup. I pictured the scene tomorrow. Jasmine, beaming with confidence, mixing the copper sulfate and the sodium hydroxide. The investors leaning forward, expecting a beautiful blue precipitate. Instead, they'd get a violent hiss, a plume of toxic gas, and maybe if they were really unlucky, a face full of shattered acid-laced glass. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone. I mashed her number on the screen, my thumb slipping, straight to voicemail. Her cheerful recorded voice, "Hi, you've reached Jasmine, leave a message," felt like a cruel joke. I called again. And again, voicemail. I sent a barrage of texts, each more frantic than the last. Jasmine calling me, urgent, lab problem, don't touch the reagents. The single gray checkmark on the messaging app was my only reply. Her phone was off. Off. Who turns their phone completely off the night before the most important presentation of their life? So there I stood, alone in the humming silence of the lab at nearly midnight, facing a choice that felt impossibly heavy. I could walk away. Lock the door, go home, bury my head under my pillow, and pretend I never saw anything. I had fulfilled my initial duty. This wasn't my experiment, not my responsibility. If I touched anything, I'd be breaking a dozen protocols. I could be the one who gets fired. But the alternative was to let her walk into that room and professionally self-destruct in the most spectacular way imaginable. I'd have to stand in the audience, knowing what was coming, my stomach churning with every word she said. For all her flakiness, Jasmine was a good person and a brilliant scientist. She didn't deserve this. I looked at the rows of deceptively labeled bottles, a minefield of chemical reactions waiting to happen. What the hell was I supposed to do? There was no real choice, was there? I couldn't just leave it, my conscience wouldn't let me sleep. So with a deep, shaky breath, I decided to become a hero. A stupid, protocol-breaking, probably going to get fired hero. I would fix it. I would identify every single substance and put the right label on it. It would be my good deed, our little secret. Jasmine would come in tomorrow, none the wiser, nail her presentation, and I'd go back to being the reliable, unremarkable lab tech in the background. I started by peeling off all the wrong labels. They came off with a satisfyingly crisp tear, leaving a neat line of naked, anonymous glass bottles. It felt like a point of no return. Then the real work began. I pulled out a rack of test tubes, my pipette, and some pH strips. It was like the final exam from hell. Okay, this one's viscous and clear, probably a glycerol solution. This one smells faintly of almonds, benzaldehyde. I worked methodically, carefully, my brain kicking into a gear it hadn't used since my university days. It was a painstaking process of elimination, sniffing, observing, and making tiny, controlled reactions on a ceramic spot plate. For a while, I was completely lost in the task, a focused bubble of scientific deduction. I was just starting to feel a tiny bit of pride in my rogue chemistry work when a shadow fell across the frosted glass of the lab door. My heart leaped into my throat. The shadow was followed by the jangle of keys and the slow, weary groan of the door being unlocked. It was Gregory, the night security guard. He's a stickler for the rules, a man whose entire worldview is built on the principle that if you're not supposed to be somewhere, you're up to no good. He pushed the door open, his flashlight beam cutting through the dim lab, and stopped dead. The beam landed on me, hunched over a bench littered with dozens of unlabeled bottles, stripped labels, and a chaotic array of testing equipment. To him, it must have looked like the single most incriminating scene imaginable. "What in God's name are you doing here?" he asked, his voice a low rumble of suspicion. "Gregory, thank God." "Look, it's a long story," I started, trying to sound calm and rational. "Jasmine's labels, they're all wrong. I'm fixing it for her presentation tomorrow." He stared at me, then at the chemical chaos on the bench, then back at me. His eyes narrowed. "Fixing it? It looks like you're trying to make a bomb or poison the water supply. Your access card wasn't used. How did you get in?" "I have a spare key for emergencies." "This ain't an emergency, son." "This is a breach," he cut me off. I tried to explain again about the demo, the investors, the catastrophe I was trying to avert. But the more I talked, the wilder it sounded, even to my own ears. The words just bounced off his wall of absolute certainty. He saw a guy in a lab after hours with a bunch of unlabeled chemicals. The verdict was already in. "I'm sorry," he said, and he didn't sound sorry at all. "I'm locking this door. The lab supervisor can sort this out with you in the morning." "No, Gregory, wait." "You don't understand," I pleaded, rushing to the door, but he was already on the other side. I heard the heavy, definitive thunk of the deadbolt sliding into place. Then his footsteps faded down the hallway. I was trapped. Not only had I failed to fix the problem, I had now become a part of it, locked in a room with a chemical disaster of my own making. The hero plan was officially a catastrophic failure. Panic set in first, a hot, clammy wave of it that made the room feel like it was shrinking. I rattled the door handle, a completely useless primal gesture. I was locked in. The presentation was in, I checked my watch, less than 8 hours. My phone had no signal in the reinforced concrete of the lab. I was well and truly screwed. For a good 20 minutes I just paced, back and forth, a caged animal in a lab coat, my mind racing through 100 terrible scenarios. Gregory calls the supervisor, Dr. Albright. Albright comes in, finds me with the unlabeled bottles. I get fired on the spot for gross misconduct. Jasmine comes in, sees the mess, has a nervous breakdown. The investors arrive to a scene of chaos and recrimination. Our funding is pulled, our project is dead. It all cascaded, one disaster leading to the next. Then through the fog of panic, a new thought emerged. A stupid, desperate, reckless thought: I couldn't fix everything. There wasn't enough time, and honestly, after Gregory's interruption, my nerves were too shot to properly identify 24 complex reagents. But I didn't need to fix everything. I just needed to fix the climax of the presentation. I knew her routine by heart, the grand finale, the part that was supposed to make the investors gasp and pull out their checkbooks. It was a simple reaction. She would mix reagent A with reagent B to produce a stunning, instantaneous, shimmering azure precipitate. It was her showstopper. My new plan was insane, but it was the only one I had. Forget the rest. Forget the saline and the distilled water. I would focus all my energy on finding the real A and the real B. I'd label those two correctly, place them front and center, and hide the rest of the chemical time bombs out of sight. When Albright and Gregory opened the door in the morning, I'd play dumb. Jasmine would arrive, grab the 2 correct bottles I'd prepared for her, perform her magic trick, and the day would be saved. It was a long shot, a gamble against chemistry and fate, but it was better than surrendering. So I got to work not as a careful scientist but as a frantic gambler at a high-stakes casino. I grabbed a handful of Petri dishes and started mixing. A drop from this bottle, a drop from that one. The first combination produced a puff of foul-smelling brown smoke. Nope. The second turned into a thick, lumpy gray sludge. Gross. I worked my way through the bottles, a madman making tiny, disgusting chemical cocktails. Some fizzed violently, some did nothing at all. One combination created a smell so unbelievably putrid, like rotten eggs and burning hair, that I actually gagged. My eyes were watering, my head was pounding, but I kept going. It felt like hours. Finally, after what must have been my 30th or 40th attempt, it happened. A drop of clear liquid met another drop of clear liquid, and instantly, poof. A cloud of the most beautiful, brilliant azure blue blossomed in the Petri dish. It was perfect. I had found them. A surge of pure, triumphant adrenaline shot through me. I might actually pull this off. With a triumphant, slightly hysterical laugh, I carefully separated the two golden ticket bottles from the rest of the chemical rabble. I found the label maker, my fingers flying across the keypad to print two perfect, crisp, and most importantly correct labels. Reagent A and Reagent B, I affixed them to the bottles with the precision of a surgeon. They looked beautiful, official, safe. The next step was hiding the evidence of my catastrophic failure of a rescue mission. I gathered up all the other unlabeled, now terrifyingly mysterious bottles and stashed them in a bottom cabinet behind a stack of old, unused beakers. Out of sight, out of mind. I wiped down the workbench, throwing away the dozens of Petri dishes filled with my foul-smelling experimental failures. By the time I was done, the lab bench looked pristine, with only the two crucial, correctly labeled reagents sitting exactly where Jasmine had left them. Perfect. Plausible deniability was my new best friend. I slumped into a lab stool, exhausted but buzzing with a manic sense of accomplishment. I had wrestled with chaos, and in one very specific, narrow way I had won. At 8 a.m. sharp, the deadbolt on the door scraped open. It was Dr. Albright, our lab supervisor, looking stern and deeply unamused. Gregory stood behind him, arms crossed, looking vindicated. "Care to explain," Dr. Albright began, his voice dangerously calm, "what you were doing in my locked lab all night?" Before I could even launch into the half-baked story I'd concocted about feeling ill and accidentally locking myself in, Jasmine burst through the door, her face pale with anxiety. "Dr. Albright, I am so sorry. I got your message. What's going on? Is everything okay for the demo?" Her eyes scanned the room and landed on the demonstration table. She saw the two perfect bottles, A and B, sitting there waiting for her. A wave of relief washed over her face. Then something shifted. Her expression changed from relief to a sudden, electrifying excitement. It was a look I knew well. It was her eureka face. "Oh my God," she breathed, rushing past me to the bench. She wasn't looking at the bottles I'd prepared. She was rummaging in her lab coat pocket, pulling out a crumpled piece of notebook paper covered in frantic scribbles. "Dr. Albright, you're not going to believe this," she announced, her voice vibrating with genius. "I had a breakthrough at 3 a.m., a total paradigm shift. I was running the calculations in my head and I realized I don't need A and B for the precipitate. It's so inefficient. I can get a much more stable and vibrant reaction using C and D instead. It cuts the material cost by 40%. And with the flourish of a magician revealing her trick, she turned her back on my two beautifully labeled, life-saving bottles. She strode over to the cabinet where I had hidden the chemical landmines, flung the door open, and confidently grabbed two of the anonymous, unlabeled bottles from the back. Time seemed to slow down. I opened my mouth to scream, to tackle her, to do something, but the sound was trapped in my throat. It was like one of those nightmares where you're trying to run but your legs are made of lead. Dr. Albright was beaming, impressed by her last-minute innovation. The investors, who had just been escorted in by a department admin, looked intrigued. Gregory just looked confused. Jasmine, oblivious to the silent horror movie playing out in my head, was in her element. She was a performer on a stage. She held up the two unlabeled bottles, my chemical Russian roulette chambers, for everyone to see. "The traditional methodology," she began, her voice clear and confident, "requires a complex and costly catalyst. But by substituting with a common saline derivative," she gestured to one bottle, which I was pretty sure contained some kind of volatile acid, and introducing a simple glucose compound, she held up the other, which I vaguely remembered producing a smell like burning tires, "we can achieve the same result with breathtaking efficiency." She poured the contents of the first bottle into a large beaker on the demonstration table. Then, with a confident smile aimed directly at the lead investor, she began to pour the second liquid in. I squeezed my eyes shut. There was no shimmering azure blue, there was a sound. A deep, wet, sickening gloop. It was followed by a furious hissing like 1,000 angry snakes. I opened my eyes just in time to see a column of thick, brown, chunky foam erupt from the beaker. It wasn't just a little foam, it was a geyser. It surged up and over the sides of the beaker, a disgusting, bubbling wave that looked exactly like vomit. It spread across the pristine white tabletop, consuming everything in its path: her notes, the spare equipment, a plate of complimentary pastries, and the smell. Oh God, the smell. The entire room was instantly filled with the suffocating stench of burnt rubber and sulfur. The demonstration, her career-defining moment, had turned into a low-budget horror movie special effect. The lead investor was actively gagging into his handkerchief. Dr. Albright's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. Jasmine just stood there, staring at the still-spewing brown foam, her confident smile frozen and then slowly crumbling into utter disbelief. It was the most magnificently catastrophic failure I had ever witnessed. Update: so yeah, it's been a rough week. Jasmine is on administrative leave pending a full laboratory safety review. I got a formal written reprimand for the after-hours entry and unauthorized handling of chemical agents, which is the corporate way of saying you are a colossal idiot and we're documenting it. My career isn't over, but it's definitely got a big, ugly dent in it. The cleanup crew had to wear hazmat suits to deal with the brown sludge. Turns out I had managed to create a novel, non-toxic but incredibly foul and persistent polymer. Lucky me. Jasmine and I finally talked yesterday after the initial shock wore off. We sat in a sad little coffee shop and she just cried, and then she explained there was nothing wrong with her labels. Not a single one was incorrect. The problem was the label maker. To save a few bucks on the project budget, she'd bought a cheap, second-hand thermal printer from some sketchy website. The printer worked, but it had a bizarre, unfixable bug in its firmware. It printed everything as a perfect mirror image. The word saline came out looking like Anilla letter 1A8. She knew about it, she wasn't an idiot. Her plan was simple. She was going to come in 10 minutes early on the morning of the presentation and just write over all the mirrored labels with a Sharpie. It would have taken her less than 5 minutes. It was a non-issue, a tiny, manageable quirk. My grand, heroic, all-night intervention, my frantic chemical detective work, my desperate gamble to save her, I hadn't been fixing a disaster. I had been the one creating it. I took her perfectly organized, mirror-labeled reagents and turned them into a chaotic, unlabeled minefield. I didn't avert a catastrophe. I meticulously engineered one out of a minor inconvenience. I tried to be the hero who saves the day. Instead, I became the cosmic joke. The punchline that cost my friend the biggest opportunity of her life.